Things have been a bit quiet in the Sixers world as we wait for the avalanche of news of the offseason and have an idea of what this Sixers team turns out to be. Well, Nick Nurse tipped his hand and spoke to Colin Cowherd, talking a little bit about the process these Sixers are going on, their evaluation stage, and what they're looking for at this point before free agency truly tips off. So I want to dive into a couple notable quotes here, kind of speak how this reflects on a similar message to what Joel Embiid was speaking on, as well as look at the Sixers roster to think about what this could mean to the team. So let's start off with, there's two notable quotes that I do want to pull up from the Cowherd interview. I want to start off with this one here, in which Colin asked, Nick Nurse discussed the Sixers offseason plans with Colin Cowherd, and Colin asked, quote, "Have you decided your direction? Do you today know? Do you and Daryl know where you're going to go? How much of these foundation moves do you know? When does it all start?" And Nick Nurse replied, quote, "I think it starts about 24 hours after our final buzzer. Daryl is really good at his job. I really got a lot of trust in him and Elton Brand and our owners. They really want to get this thing right, and I think exploring every option right now, but then being ready for plan B, C, D, E, F, and G, because I think there's a whole lot of things that can happen with free agency, with the draft, with trades. I think it'll be an active summer. It certainly will be for us. It has to be." So I do like the overall message here, the optimism. There has to be some activity, that we know there's a lot of rosters still to be overhauled. And there was one more point that he kind of talked about with the roster that I did think was noteworthy here. So to give that quote here, and I want to pull up this one specifically, it says, "Nick Nurse and Daryl Morey are discussing the importance of team chemistry a lot this offseason as this team prepares for free agency." Nurse told Colin Cowherd, quote, "We talk about it a lot. Obviously, we've got a lot of cap space and a lot of roster to fill. Finding the right pieces that are going to be able to space and shoot, defend and rebound, have some IQ, have some late game moxie and guts, and the things that it takes is really the key for us to get where we want to go." So this was phrased in a question in kind of respect to the New York Knicks, talking about how that was a team that may not have the top-end talent of some of these other contending teams, but just know their identity, know their roles, have the chemistry within each other, and play together incredibly well. So Colin asked, like, what do you take away from that? Is that something you're looking to apply to the Sixers? And continuity has been such an interesting word. This was something that Joel Embiid used in the post right following elimination. And to give the Embiid quote here, which I do think mirrors a good portion of what Nurse and Morey are discussing, which is a good thing in the long haul here, I did want to play this here. So this quote from Joel Embiid here, it says, "On the flip side, Embiid and Tyrese Maxey were able to grow as a pair. And that continuity is something that the big fella hopes he can keep." Quote, "Like I said, all of them lasted 1 year," Embiid said after the round 1 loss to the New York Knicks. "That's the problem. Who won last year? Denver. Jamal, Nikola, they've been together for 8 years or something like that. 7. You look at some of the other teams that won, Golden State Warriors, they've been together for a long time. I don't remember you just put a team together and hope that it worked out for 1 year." And I do think this is a very valuable and valid point that Joel Embiid hits on. In fact, that's been one of my greater takeaways of these playoffs as a whole. You find your plan and you stick to it, even when it doesn't always look like it is working. That I do think that's important at the NBA level. I know he used the Nuggets as an example, but that's absolutely true with them. Same point with the Warriors, and I think there's even some better ones with this year's NBA. For example, the Dallas Mavericks with Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. They didn't even make the playoffs last year, and I know they didn't make that push for the play-in at the end. Ultimately landed Derek Lively, which was a massive success and a huge reason why they are where they are today. But the point being, you laid your foundation, you kept finding pieces to add to it, and you kind of got to a spot where you should be pretty happy for. The Boston Celtics, people have threatened to break up Jason Tatum, break up Jaylen Brown. Are their games too similar? Well, they stuck with it. They found the right pieces around those two, that they have their foundation in place, and now it looks like they're going to end up with a championship because of it. A team like the Minnesota Timberwolves, it looked atrocious, the fit of Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns last year, but you know what? Worked pretty well this year, and they found a way to embrace that identity, find a way to play together. It took more than just one season for things to kick in, and that is a level where these Sixers have not been able to do. That we had half a season with Jimmy Butler. We had 1.5 years with James Harden. We tried out the Ben Simmons message, but we saw the way that got derailed, or trying to make that fit work. The Sixers have yet to fully embrace this second identity, really since the Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid era. That there has not been that secondary star to work with Joel Embiid, and thankfully Tyrese Maxey looks to be that piece. But the other problem here is, with all this chatter about continuity, the importance of that, the Sixers have one player officially under contract for next year. And to dive into the specific cap hit here, that being Joel Embiid, the man that was just speaking, with his $51.4 million cap hit. Right below him, it is Paul Reed on a non-guaranteed $7.7 million deal. Jeff Dowtin on a $2.196 million team option there. And Ricky Council on a non-guaranteed $1.891 million deal there. Now, while I believe in continuity and how important that is, it's a little bit more important than continuity. It's talent. You got to find a way to improve these pieces while keeping some sort of pattern or figuring out how all these guys can play together, fit together, and every other topic that you want to have there. And I did want to take a look at the active roster, kind of piece through some of these guys that I think could be back when trying to keep this continuity. And I did want to make a note about the cap holds and what that specific means. So looking at the active roster, you can see the cap hit that there is already set. There's obviously some that the Sixers are going to want no part of, such as Tobias Harris, over $45 million cap hit there. Crazy number. Buddy Hield, $28 million cap hit. And to put into perspective what specifically that means, the cap hold, the cap hit. So in this current situation, obviously the Sixers have no one on roster. It's Joel Embiid and blank space in the non-guaranteed at this point. So that cap hit number, if you want to re-sign a player into bird rights, that you use that cap hit. So an example in which the Sixers will absolutely do that, Tyrese Maxey here. So looking at his cap hit, $13 million. He's obviously going to make more than that. He's going to sign his max contract, and deservingly so this offseason. The Sixers will take that cap hit because then they can sign him into his bird rights because he's been here. If they want to revoke these bird rights or revoke the cap hit to get that number off the salary cap, you have to revoke the birds rights, meaning you can't go above the salary cap to re-sign him. You have to keep that number there for that to be the case. So flexibility has been one of the biggest words of the offseason. The reason that the Sixers have this flexibility is none of these guys are officially they're accepting or keeping the cap hits right now. Those are decisions that still need to be made, and each one is a little different. Again, I'll use a couple other examples here. Like, for example, I use Robert Covington. I think there's a chance the Sixers do re-sign Robert Covington. It will not be for $17 million. So that will be a situation in which they do revoke his cap hit, his cap hold there, and look to sign him in another direction. That's much more of a veterans minimum type range that I think he will be in, especially following the injuries last year. But even if they do intend on bringing back Covington, that's not going to be a number they want to keep because they can get more value freeing up that space, looking to sign others, and it's not the ultimate risk. If Robert Covington ends up getting a nice offer elsewhere, I think these Sixers can still sleep at night, even though he is a guy that I would prefer to be around and think would have impacted this team in a pretty significant way if he was able to play in that playoff run, which obviously was not the case. So I did want to note that specifically, but as far as players that I do think could be back, there are a couple guys I want to dive into. For starters, the guy that absolutely should not be back, that being Tobias Harris. And of course, I know the 17.2 points per game this season, 6.5 assists, 6.5 rebounds, 3.1 assists, somehow shot 48.7% from the field and 35.3%. It blew me away. He was assisted on 95.6% of his three-pointers. I know that's kind of his game, but it just does not feel like the catch and shoot. And the 27.1% of his shot attempts being three-pointers, just far too low there. That is a number that screams to me. While Tobias Harris is the ultimate piece of continuity here, we've seen the way this story is written. And once again, this is where the Sixers have to sacrifice continuity for talent. And I really do feel I can make the argument that that contract as a whole is per capita one of the worst contracts in NBA history. And what especially blows my mind about it is it's not like he got hurt. It's not like he missed games. And when you compare it to the other bad contracts, that's a lot of the stories of like, well, he was not around or was incapable of suiting up for this amount of games. Tobias was always there. He just always was exactly who he is. And for the Sixers, that is not who they needed him to be. It is not fully Tobias Harris's fault. And frankly, I think he wants no part of coming back, and rightfully so. That is a mutual feeling. It is not fully Tobias Harris's fault that he was offered a contract that his talent level could never live up to. But the reality is the Sixers have been handcuffed from a salary cap perspective in a way that it is just nearly impossible to build a true contender around, and that is why they have to be so careful in where these funds are allocated. Now, there are two guys that I do believe will be back and will be important for continuity. Number one, Kelly Oubre. 15.4 points per game last year, 5.0 rebounds, 1.5 assists, which is a career high there, 1.1 steals per game, shot 44.1% from the field, 31.1% from three. He shoots 33% on corner threes. 85.1% of his threes are assisted, and 37% of his shots are threes. So I'll say I've never seen a more confident, below-average shooter than Kelly Oubre, but there's a lot of good that he did bring to the game, and I do want to give him credit for that. That I think Kelly Oubre went a far way for breaking the narrative or the stigma in his games, that he played basketball that is conducive to winning more last year than he has at any other point in his career, and he does deserve his respect for that. Now, for Kelly, for sure, the outlook for him going into last year was to take that minimum contract, rebuild his value, and cash out this offseason. I'm very curious what the market value is for Oubre, but I think there's a real world where he's more valuable to the Sixers than he is to a team on the open market. That I don't know if I see a team backing up the Brink truck with a massive ton of cash ready to offer Kelly Oubre. I still think that people are a little bit nervous from some of the past Kelly Oubre, experiences, where he certainly has not been a model citizen or a model basketball player in some other locations, but that's not the version of Oubre that was in Philadelphia. Frankly, he proved a lot to me, that he defends hard, he's good in transition, he's a team player, guys seem to like him, and he stepped up in some massive moments. I do see the fit next to Joel Embiid. I think as a cutter, the way that he was able to run the dunker spot, run baseline cuts, and create offense off ball, that was all really important to me, and those are characteristics that the Sixers should value. So I want Kelly Oubre back in a Sixers uniform. I think that is the type of continuity that they should keep. Again, that is going to be a money decision depending on what he gets on the open market, but I've seen a little bit of buzz about him being potentially in that mid-level exception type range, which is about $8 million per year, which they can sign up to 3 years. If we're talking like a 3-year, $24 million contract for Kelly Oubre, I'd be very happy with that. That I think that's a high-value contract, a guy that can outplay that number, and I do think it's still a fair conversation to have that even as good as Oubre was last year, he was in a bit bigger role than should likely be the case for a successful basketball team. But if we're talking about reducing him to like a 6-man Kelly Oubre type role, I think that could be really good for this Sixers team. Obviously, you got to figure out the rest of the pieces of the puzzle before that can be the case. But another guy that I did want to mention was Nico Batum here. Now, he's not a guy that jumps off the page from a stats perspective. 5.3 points, 4.1 rebounds, 2.1 assists, shot 39.5% from three this year. 1,000% of his threes are assisted, which is hilarious, but makes sense there. Also shoots 43.4% on corner threes. He is 35 years old, and there was a lot of buzz about him retiring. This dates back to, I saw his wife send out a tweet indicating that would be the case following the Olympics. If Nico Batum is coming back next year, I think it is likely he will be in a Sixers uniform. I've had a tough time putting kind of a price perspective. Like, he's obviously a guy that is worth more than the minimum. I mean, he started and played 30-plus minutes in a number of playoff games last year. He basically won the Sixers that playing game against the Heat, in which he got red hot from beyond the three-point arc and hit a ton of shots to help this team. He's worth more than a minimum, but I'm also not super comfortable with breaking the bank for him. He's a guy that I think will likely fit the category of maybe a 1-year slight overpay. If we're talking about like a 1-year, $10 million deal for Nico Batum or something like that. And the reality of it is there's not really a Batum replacement. Some of his unique skills, his ability as an entry passer, the no-dip three, the good defense, the switchability, the inbounds passing that he can do, they're all just little skills that this team needs, and he was super helpful in this. Like, there were games this year where Batum would be effectively not playing, that he was listed as questionable on the injury report. He would be suited up and sitting on the bench with the intent of not playing. And there were situations where Nick Nurse would literally use him just to make an inbounds pass late in games. Like, that is the type of player that he was and kind of the trust that he earned. And Joel Embiid seems to like him. They both speak French to each other. They seem friendly. So all that stuff is very valuable. And the entry passes to Joel are incredibly valued to this team, especially early on in the season when he first got here. The Sixers ran a ton of sets where it was Batum coming to the top of the arc, kind of throwing an inbounds pass to Joel, and Joel going to work in a more effective way and a cleaner pass than we've seen from just about anyone outside of James Harden there. So that was a huge deal for the Sixers team. If Batum is ready to play another year, which he did seem to really like it in Philadelphia after he was traded here in that Harden deal, I do think it could happen, and I do hope for that to be the case. That's the type of continuity that I would like. And my last piece before I wrap up here is how hard it is to project with all these other pieces until we know what that big fish is. If it is Paul George, if it is Jimmy Butler, if it is LeBron James, or if it's none of these guys, like the supplementary cast or the supporting cast around those guys change drastically depending on what that skill set is of that third star or that big piece or that big splash that they make in free agent. Or maybe it isn't that big splash. Maybe it is paying for Malik Monk and Klay Thompson or guys like that. But that still changes that. Then you need rebounding. Then you need defense. Like, all these pieces of the puzzle shift around when you know what that main kind of target is brought in. So I still think that is the holdup now, and that is why we are a little bit stuck on the Sixers end. And my fear being a little bit that they could miss out on some of these mid-tier or average-type players when going for the big fish because, you got to show that level of importance. That a team could look like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is the one missing team or the one missing piece to us having a championship run versus the Sixers need a ton of other stuff to develop in that direction before they can commit to a guy like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, even though he's one of the more malleable and can kind of fit in just about any lineup, so maybe a poor example there. But you do understand the point that they're still focused on this big option before they can round out the small stuff in the bottom of the roster there. So let me know what you guys think from Nick Nurse's comments. Are you intrigued? Is that good news to you? Is this something that does not move the meter? Drop your thoughts below, and make sure you are smashing that subscribe button to keep the Sixers Digest family growing. We'll have another live coming this week, probably tonight with Cliff, sorting out the time right now, so stay posted for that. Drop a like if you have not already. I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.